Yes.
If you're not a conservative, what will you be?
Well, I didn't say I'm not a conservative. I mean, I'm a big C conservative. I would really like to see a principled conservative party. I'd like to see a party that would really tackle, liberalize a whole variety of our industries and competition in this country. I'd like to see a conservative party that actually worked on some of those files I talked about, family law, the CBC, private health care, all of those conservative issues that ought to be conservative issues. We can't even discuss them. I'd like to see the conservatives tackle political correctness and help the provinces and the universities to really overcome the incredible morass we find ourselves at the university level. There's so many areas that this government should and could be active and just is completely absent. Okay, the plane's gone dead. Anybody else? Questions? Yep.
What is it about these kind of compromises or deficiencies or backsliding in the conservative movement that you might identify as thematically or functionally similar to or the same as those things that you were observing on the left that made you recoil so much in the first decade of the 21st century?
I think a lot of that's it's a very interesting, good question. I mean, I covered that. It's sort of when you look at Islam, and so you have this spectacle in Parliament of Thomas Mulcair and Justin Trudeau being upset when Harper discusses the whole issue of the niqab. To them, it's anti-women. And so to them, they can't differentiate between Islam, the religion, and Islamism, the political ideology. And it's the same thing for a part of the conservative base that can't differentiate between Muslims or Islam, the religion, and Islamism, the ideology. And I think that's where they're quite similar, and that's all in Chapter 8. Yes?
I'm frantically looking through Chapter 8 because I was involved into it. And there's a point raised rather interestingly, which I've lost the place for to talk about, because it goes back to an interview where Enoch Powell had a chance to kick the equivalent of the 60s. The 60s out of court. And Powell was asked, aren't you worried about all the sort of lunatics and neo-Nazis?
Right, and your question?
And Powell, no, what I'm trying to do, there's a parallel passage. I'll talk with him anyway. And
Question.
yeah, the question is what happened is how do you answer the questions about the people who actually have to put up with mosques and lower income neighborhoods who are kind of not as articulate as most of the people here, who don't have the wherewithal or the connections to fight this sort of thing, and they feel abandoned. So of course they're going to gravitate to yellows and skinheads. How do you deal with that sort of criticism of the elites?
Well, I think I've covered that in the book. I think it's quite clear if the elites don't want to discuss the problem of Islamism, if they don't want to discuss the problem of Muslim enclaves where there's trouble, then yes, you're going to see the rise of radical right-wing parties.
So
shouldn't be surprised.
What solution do you propose?
Well, the solution I propose is that we really get serious about confronting the real problem, which is Islamism. It's not terrorism, it's Islamism, and that political ideology has to be handled front and center.
And
Robert, let's give other people a chance. Yes.
Brett.
Tamara.
Thank you. Just a quick question. I'm really interested in what was the hardest part about coming to this realization that, oh my God, I'm no longer a socialist. And what is it now that's hard about sort of what makes you sort of stay, you know, like you said earlier, that you have this heart of a radical in you. You know, you want to foment change and, you know, promote democracy and all these really good things, but you know, what's hard about it? You know, like there must have been some sort of really emotional loggerheads there going on.
Well, I'm not sure, you know, when I was back in the 1980s, I was always horrified that Ronald Reagan was working with death squads in Latin and South America. Here was a man who, I wanted the United States to help topple dictators, which is why I was delighted when George Bush toppled Saddam Hussein. I'm very much sort of a neocon hawk, and I want to go after dictators, these awful oppressive regimes all over the world. And I think that's what unifies my beliefs from when I was a socialist to my beliefs as sort of a neocon Zionist Trotskyite hawk. That's why. Yes, Roy.
So one of the, I haven't finished your book, but one of the things I've had problems with in the past is the fact that I happen to be gay and I'm conservative, and many people don't actually, still don't believe that. They say, no, you're not gay. How did you find telling your gay friends that you were conservative?
It was really hard. I mean, like I said, it was easy coming out as a gay man in the 1980s compared to coming out as a conservative in the 2000s. That was and what I find astounding is that you could fight your whole life to be who you are. I am who I am, and yet there are people who want to tell you how to think just because of your sexual orientation. I had the same thing with when I came back from the Conservative Party conference in 2008, I think it was, and I tried to start up a gay conservative group. And a local blogger, Dr. Dog, sent me an email. And he didn't understand how people of color and gay people could be conservative. And so to him, it wasn't just sexual orientation, but the color of your skin would dictate what you thought.
So I'm a
And I thought, how
gay
repulsive.
person of color.
Well, you're conflicted, as we know. Yes.
You go first.
I'm curious to know a little bit what you think about armed forces and military engagement, because we've seen during the last years that more and more from doing traditional encounters, it's more and more like protecting the national resources. And I would like to know what your thoughts are about that.
Well, I don't know about protecting national resources. I mean, there are, if it was up to me, I would have sent a cruise missile into the Assad compound in Damascus, and I would send in ground troops to rout ISIS. I think within 2 or 3 weeks we can destroy ISIS completely. This is the shame of the West, that we have waited. We've sat out the entire Syria conflict. We've done nothing, and lo and behold, the Syria conflict comes to us. This is going to happen over and over again, and we have to be clear about the need to, yes, we're going to have to use our military. There's a reason why we haven't. And when it's proper, we should go in and get rid of these horrible dictators. Yes?
My wife's a naval commander, so she asked this question from some position of knowledge. But what we're really confronting, and I confronted this all the time in Norway, is cultural hegemony. The so-called cultural elite that will dictate to anyone who does not think as they do that they must agree with them. And this is an agenda that is the most difficult thing for you fellas to face right now. This is the greatest. I'm talking
Do you have a question?
This is a question. How are we going to face cultural hegemony? This demand that we agree with the left, that they ridicule us and call us every possible name under the book, and even insinuate that you can't be gay if you're conservative.
Okay. Well, look, it's not just the left, it's people on the right and people on the left. And what I find really fascinating, and you see some of this in the book, if you take the power of narrative, let's take the narrative of Afghanistan as a quagmire. Right? So the left, the cultural elites of the left will tell you Afghanistan was a quagmire. It's a quagmire, it's a quagmire. And that seeps throughout our culture, and it seeps into the right. People on the right. So I can't tell you how many conservatives I've met who will tell you Afghanistan is a quagmire. They use the same language. And, you're talking about the war in Iraq and George Bush. Well, George Bush, lied about WMD, and, when you say it long enough, and it moves over into, now you can't even get the Republicans in a debate right now to even talk nice things, say nice things about George Bush. Even the Republicans won't. And so I think we face a huge problem. It's the culture that we have is a counterculture. The current culture is countercultural. The left is in control of the culture, and it's insidious, and it's, like I say, it's something we all have to fight. Keith.
So, Fred, read your book. I got the Kobo version, of course. The day came out. Read the whole thing in 2 days. It's an easy read. Loved it. What's your next book going to be about?
Well, I have 2 books that I want to write, and the next book is going to really be a little strange, but when I was growing up, when I was 19, I became fascinated by the JFK assassination. And when I was writing this book with Terry, we actually wrote 3 chapters using the JFK assassination as a metaphor to illustrate various political views. And we decided in the end to scrap those chapters. When I want to write the book, I was a teenage conspiracy freak. And use it as a method of showing how narrative, and when I say narrative, I talked to a lot of people about this book in the last year, and I used to tell them about I'm using the JFK assassination to illustrate some points. And everybody I talked to would say, oh, there's something there. What happened? Oh, there's some mystery. And so I want to show how narrative flows through our culture and affects everybody, no matter whether there's no truth in it at all. And so that'll be my next book, and then after that I really want to go into the archives, and I want to look into union support for Israel, for Zionism in the 1930s and 40s, and really documented the incredible union support for Israel back then, and then contrasted to what's happened. Tony?
Fred, I've asked you this question either around Urinator's dinner table, potentially in your backyard, or maybe over beers at the New Edinburgh pub. But explain it for a simple Catholic Irish kid. You dedicate your book to Christopher Hitchens. How do you reconcile your atheism with your Judaism?
Well, look, I'm Jewish. Being Jewish is more than a religion. We are a people. And so there's a whole variety of cultural traditions, music, and humor, and you name it, that I really identify with. But I am an atheist, and I can't escape that. Daniel.
For in your book, you talked about going to Israel in the 80s, and if I'm not mistaken, you didn't have a chance to visit Israel until just probably a few years ago. So I wanted to ask you about how the 2 different visits contrasted for you.
There were a few other visits back in the 90s when I was working for Intel Corporation. Well, how it's changed, Israel's become a real modern industrial state. I mean, when you go there now, it's very cosmopolitan, and I was struck. I went there with Tamara. I was really struck one night in Tel Aviv. We went into a small little Chinese restaurant, and we walked in and ordered our dinner, and at one of the tables, there was a young boy around 8 years old doing his Hebrew homework with his father, who was Chinese, and the son was speaking fluent Hebrew, and his father was speaking broken Hebrew. And you see scenes like that all over Israel, whether it's Chinese people and Thai people and Ethiopians, and Israel has also become extremely cosmopolitan, and that's I think a big change. The other thing, when I was on kibbutz in the 1980s, I was on one of the most socialist kibbutzes you can think of, but they just freaked out when they found out I was gay. They just went completely bananas. They could not handle it. Rod.
Fred, I think Christopher Hitchens' mother, was Jewish. He has Jewish antecedents.
Yes.
The other thing was, Fred, I was going to say how typical you are. And Churchill said this. He said, if you're a young person and you don't have a heart, you're not a socialist. And an older person, pardon me, if you're not a conservative, then you don't have a brain. So you've done it.
Yes, Bob.
Okay, you mentioned union support for Israel in the 1930s, and that was the case. But as you know today, unions, who are over 70% public sector unions, have a whole load of funds that they direct to causes that are not only against Israel, but against conservative candidates and ridings, both federally, provincially, and otherwise. They fund Israel Apartheid Week, of all things. What would you do to rectify that problem so that they could not use members' dues for those purposes?
It's a tough question, you know. I think, you know, they are free to use their money as they want. I mean, they've got to make those decisions. I think all we can do is shine some light and make sure that people know what they're doing. I mean, the fact that you see Cup W people with Hezbollah flags at rallies in Ottawa is incredibly shameful. And one can hope that at some point this will all change and they'll realize that they've made some incredible mistakes along the way.
Why did you call it conservative confidential?
Why did I call it conservative confidential? The first name I wanted to call it was from one of the chapters, you know, Harper's Holy War on Homos. And that got sort of vetoed by people. I thought this would just sort of, you know, I wanted to get it out before the election. I thought, you know what, this will make it a little saucy and people will think, oh my God, what's in there? What is he saying? There's something confidential, you know, and so what's interesting is the second part of the title, Inside the Fabulous Blue Tent. People aren't really sure what that means. The Fabulous Blue Tent was a party that I started with two friends for gay conservatives at Conservative Party conferences. I was on a radio show last week where they thought, oh, you're talking about how good the Conservative Blue Tent is. It's fabulous. So I'm hoping that people are